Hello, everybody. It's Stephen here from Bland Designs and the Idiot Quilter, and this is a very special vlog from me. As you know, the Trump is about to be put into office in the next week at the time of this recording, and we as Canadians are very upset with Trump. Now, I know this is not unique to the world, but we have a special reason to be very worried about Trump coming to power. And that's because of the threats that he has made to our country. The threat of making us the 51st state, the threat of calling our prime minister a governor, which is not the language of diplomacy. And Walter and I went through a lot of this anguish that we as Canadians have right now on Stephen and Walter Live a week ago. But since then, I have received from one of my subscribers two letters that I wish to share with you. And that's why I'm doing this special vlog, because I think both these letters, which are written by intelligent individuals, really set the whole scene uh, behind Trump's threats of taking Canada over. And also, it puts in very clear words and language why this would not be a good move for the American people and not a good move for Canadians as well. But more than anything, it shows you what we are made of. Canadians are not Americans. We are not like Americans. We are proud to be Canadians, and both of these letters reflect it. And I'll have to excuse myself right now if I get a little emotional when I read certain parts of these letters, because this is really a very emotional issue for all of us that are proud Canadians. So the first letter comes from somebody by the name of, and let me check the last page, J. Mark Cote. I don't know who this person is, but according to the sender of this, she found this letter written on December the 26th, 2024, on a Facebook group called Women United Stronger Together. And the author of this letter lives in Toronto, Ontario. Whether or not this letter actually was sent to Donald J. Trump as it has been addressed, who knows? Donald J. Trump, thanks. Sorry about that. But I'm going to read it to you just as it is without any commentary. Dear President-elect Donald J. Trump, so you want to acquire Canada as the 51st state. Interesting proposition. There are a few factors that you might want to consider before annexation and possibly experiencing the worst case of buyer's remorse since, well, maybe the time Germany took back the Tsars and then annexed Czechoslovakia. First things first. Both Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico want to be states. They have a prior claim to being the 51st and the 52nd state. They won't take kindly to being overlooked in favor of the great big neighbor to the north. One of the reasons your political affiliates have for years blocked DC and PR from becoming states is that this would create 4 new senators, all of whom would be Democrats. Second, as the 53rd state, Canada would actually demand statehood for all 10 provinces and 3 territories. That would mean 65 states, a big jump from the current 50. To paraphrase Roy Schneider in Jaws, you're going to need a bigger flag. But it's not just a flag problem. The 13, a very unlucky number, new states will get 26 senators and 58 representatives. Canada's population is slightly greater than the population of California. It's highly unlikely that all 26 new senators and 58 new representatives will be Democrats. We have Alberta, which is very much like Texas, only colder, but the vast majority of them will be. In our last general election, 62.79% of the vote went to left-leaning parties. In the previous elections, the numbers were higher. So, your new 15 states, the Canadian 13 and the DC and PR, will be overwhelmingly Democratic. Not too good for your party. Devastating, in fact. Third, this is the trickiest point of all for you to consider. Canada is not one unified nation like the US. We're not a federation. We're a confederation. and our fractious provinces, like states, only bigger, act accordingly. They do not play well with each other, and they all have appositional relationships with the federal government, even when the governments of the provinces and the county are formed by the same party. We just don't get along with each other very well. I think the word there should have been country, not county. The four most serious problem children are alphabetically Alberta, British Columbia, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Quebec. And yes, they are going to insist you use the accent when they become a state. There's going to be none of this ban the French language business that was imposed on the Acadians in Louisiana. Alberta might get along with the US of A because it has somewhat aligned interests, but you won't need to hold your breath long in anticipation of the massive resentment complex Alberta experiences on a cyclical basis to come to the fore. Sooner or later, some premier of Alberta is going to say, let the eastern bastards freeze in the dark, because, well, that's where most of the oil comes from. Of all Canada's problem children, Alberta is tied with Quebec when it comes to not playing well with others. British Columbia, and don't think of changing the name unless you're prepared to have it be a word you won't be able to pronounce, has, like Alberta, an inferiority complex. But that's not what's going to make it a difficult member of your more perfect union. Most of the land and resources don't actually belong to the Canadian government. They belong to approximately 200 Indigenous communities, or what they should be called, nations. They have a prior claim, and if things don't work out for them, as things haven't for about 157 years under the Canadian government, they're not going to be quiet. They have excellent lawyers and leaders who will win in court. Well, maybe not your Supreme Court, but in other courts in the world. Newfoundland and Labrador only recently became a province of Canada. In 1949, 3 years after you were born, there are still people who proudly announce, I'm a Newfoundlander, when mistaken for Canadian. And while it's true that in the days following the tragedy of September the 11th, Newfoundlanders were helpful and gave shelter and sustenance to Americans stranded on their rocky island, do not take their kindness for weakness. These people are from very sturdy stock. They fish the North Atlantic, they work on oil rigs in the same sea, and face catastrophic storms. In the First World War, when they were a nation, they provided more soldiers per capita than any other country. You just can't push them around. Don't try. And then there's Quebec, the province where, in 1632, my ancestors settled on a lovely place, Ile de Lorraines. For almost 400 years, these good French Catholics have populated their province and much of Canada and the U.S. The American author, Jack Kerouac, was of Quebecois stock, and there are millions of people throughout the U.S. descended from these same people, including the aforementioned Acadians, who, now in New Orleans, are called Cajun. While the disgruntled in other provinces will merely whine, the separatists of Quebec go to extremes. In the past, they have kidnapped and murdered, blown up mailboxes and stock exchanges, all in the name of taking their province out of our confederation. Over the years, we've managed to tame them. Now they have formed political parties dedicated to the breaking up of Canada, what you would call treason, and they get elected to sit in our House of Commons, like your House of Representatives, where their only purpose is to fight for a larger share of the pie at the expense of the rest of Canada. And we allow it. Every now and then they hold a referendum asking the question, should Quebec be a sovereign nation, but with military and economic ties to Canada? So far the answer has been no. But it might not be next time, when the question is, should Quebec be a sovereign nation, but with military and economic ties to the US of A? The Quebecois also speak French. Don't try to take that away from them. It won't end well. Fourth, if you're still following and haven't decided to hell with it, who needs these backwards people and all that oil, water, hydropower, lumber, rare earth minerals, wheat, and access to the Arctic Ocean? There's an even more difficult problem for you. Our Indigenous peoples, roughly 600 nations, are vocal and active. They're very demanding. Unlike the separatists of Quebec, they don't want a larger share of the pie. They want two things. They want the whole pie because it was stolen from them, and failing that, they want to be treated in an equal and respectful manner that this country is still struggling to do. Imagine that. About 1.6 million people who are no longer asking but demanding to be treated with respect after hundreds of years of being treated as less than human. What's more frightening about these people isn't that they're fierce or strong or willing to blow things up to force their way. What's more troubling is that they are right. Do you really want to go up against such a force? Fifth, I haven't begun to tackle the technical issues of annexation. What are we going to do about the currency? We're just in the process of printing new legal tender with King Charles on some bills and coins and national heroes like Terry Fox. While it's likely we'll give up the idea of having a king on our bills, it's highly unlikely we'll five up on Terry Fox, a man who didn't finish his cross-country run to raise awareness of money for research into cancer. He's one of our great heroes. You'd call him a loser because he died before he made it halfway across Canada. We call him a hero. That difference of opinion will be one not easy to resolve, no matter how hard you try. It might be easiest if the U.S. just accepts the Canadian dollar at par and replace our coins and bills with yours, although it'll take some getting used to going back to having pennies and $1 and $2 bills. That exchange, Canadian dollar to U.S. dollar at par, will likely cost the U.S. something worth north of a couple of $1 trillion. Doesn't that $100 million USD subsidy to Canada begin to look like a bargain when you think about it? Bear in mind that you'll have to redesign your money. It'll have to contain both English and French. That's right, $1 bills will have to have an for every one, and everything in English will have to be repeated in French. This might result in the Spanish-speaking people in the U.S. demanding that Spanish be on the money too, and there will be more Spanish speakers in the expanded U.S. than French speakers. You'll be looking at uno as well as un and one. Sixth, the U.S. of A. is famously a melting pot. Immigrants, when they were welcomed, stepped off their boats originating in Odessa to leave the old world behind and begin anew as Americans. In Canada, we opted to be a mosaic. Our immigrants arrived from Jamaica and Pakistan and India by the planesful, knowing that they would be welcome to hold on to their culture, language, headscarves, and turbans. We have a number in our aforementioned House of Commons. These people who have kept their ways aren't going to melt into the morass of being American because they cannot conceive of being like everyone else. This brings up a rather discomfiting set of facts. Canada, like the U.S., has been accepting refugees for a long time. Many of our refugees come from other countries, beginning with what we call United Empire Loyalists, those people loyal to King George III and the British Crown. Once they're deemed Americans, they'll have access to your courts and probably will have rights to sue for compensation for the theft of their property in your War of Independence. In addition to the United Empire Loyalists, the population of Canada swelled in the 1960s and 1970s with what the U.S. called draft dodgers and what we called college and university professors. They're an articulate lot, and they have strong opinions about U.S. foreign policy. Other refugees that Canada has accepted over the years include those from the Philippines, Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Korea, Costa Rica, Syria, Guatemala, Iran, Iraq, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Congo, Laos, and Chile. Those people and their descendants are unlikely to feel warmly about being made U.S. citizens, given that what they fled were situations caused by American military intervention in their nation's affairs. Seventh, if Canada has become part of the U.S. of A., who will enter the Great War years ahead of the U.S., paving the way for you to save the world for democracy? Canada was among the first nations, together with Newfoundland, to enter the First World War on August 4, 1914. The U.S. entered on April 6, 1917. As for the Second World War, Canada entered on September 10, 1939, the U.S. on December 7, 1941. And yes, there were wars long before the American forces were deployed. It's true that Canada hasn't met its NATO commitment, and it's never good to make a promise and not keep it, but Canadian treasure and blood was lost to those two wars for a total of more than 5 years before your Congress voted to join the side of what we like to think were the good guys. And about joining wars, our population is leery of foreign wars, and our politicians have been able to spot situations created to give cause for escalations and invasions. Lyndon Baines Johnson famously told our Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, "Don't you come into my living room and piss on my rug." Canada had declined to join the U.S. in its war in Vietnam. Less than 40 years later, we declined to join the coalition of the willing when the U.S. invaded Iraq. We could read the photographs and intel your experts provided. We believed our eyes and not the propaganda. But don't think we haven't had the U.S.'s back. On September the 11th, 2001, when the U.S. ordered all planes grounded, many of them landed in airports across this country. We did not turn you away. This may seem like a small thing, but on that day no one knew how many planes had been turned into terrifying bombs, and yet we allowed hundreds of yours to land on our safe soil. John Ralston Saul said or wrote somewhere that Canada was a country engaged in a continuing process of defining itself. We're a philosophical people, constantly asking ourselves, what is Canada? And who are we? And where is here? In public discourse, in our art, in our literature, and in our newspapers. We're a messy lot. We have many differences. Some of us think that these differences are what make the Canadian democracy resilient. Competing agendas and voices have somehow managed to come to a compromise, if not a consensus. Canada is famous for compromises, but we're not compromising. We believe in a number of fundamentals that are truly Canadian. The majority never gets to run roughshod over the minority. Universal health care, universal child care, and eventually universal dental care. These programs, entitlements as you call them in the U.S., are sure to come out your way if Canada is annexed. We'll establish a strong majority in both of your legislative houses, together with the more progressive states, and the reforms necessary to build a very different country will be passed, one after the other. It just might turn out that annexing Canada works in reverse. The U.S. will begin to look a lot more like us and a lot less like what you think it should. Maybe by now you and Elon Musk, who should know better after all, his mother is Canadian born and he lived here for a couple of years, might be thinking this annexation idea isn't such a good business. It really isn't. Do yourself a favor and look to other places that threaten with annexation, because you do not want to have the second worst case of buyer's remorse in the history of one country annexing another. It might turn out to be the worst, second to none. So I think that particular letter really puts things into perspective. I think especially for Americans who see the stereotype of what Canadians are like, I think that might give you, if you really think about it, a little bit more insight into who we are as a people and as a nation, and why annexing us or trying to take us over is not good, well, as it said in the letter, is not good business for the American people. So that was the first letter. I need some coffee. If you're still with me, here's the second letter. The second letter is written by a former Prime Minister of Canada, a very well-respected man. His name is, because he's just celebrated his 91st birthday, Jean Chrétien, French Canadian, Quebecois, he's Quebecois. And this is what he wrote, and you will hear echoes of the other letter in this letter as well. Today is my 91st birthday. It's an opportunity to celebrate with family and friends, to look back on the life I've had the privilege to lead, and to reflect on how much this country we all love so much has grown and changed over the course of the 9 decades I've been on Earth. I will get a little emotional over this, because unlike the first letter, this one speaks even more to my sense of being a proud Canadian. So bear with me. This year, I've also decided to give myself a birthday present. I'm going to do something in this article that I don't do very often anymore, and sound off on a big issue affecting the state of the nation and profoundly bothering me and so many other Canadians. The totally unacceptable insults and unprecedented threats to our very sovereignty from U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. I have 2 very clear and simple messages. To Donald Trump, from one old guy to another, give your head a shake. What could you make you think that Canadians would ever give up the best country in the world, and make no mistake, that is what we are, to join the United States? I can tell you, Canadians prize our independence. We love our country. We have built something here that is the envy of the world when it comes to compassion, understanding, tolerance, and finding a way for people of different backgrounds and faiths to live together in harmony. We've also built a strong social safety net, especially with public health care, that we are very proud of. It's not perfect, but it's based on the principle that the most vulnerable among us should be protected. This may not be the American way or the Trump way, but is the reality I have witnessed and lived with my whole long life. If you think that threatening and insulting us is going to win us over, you really don't know a thing about us. You don't know that when it came to fighting in 2 world wars for freedom, we signed up both times years before your country did. We fought and we sacrificed well beyond our numbers. We also had the guts to say no to your country when it tried to drag us into a completely unjustified and destabilizing war in Iraq. We built a nation across the most rugged, challenging geography imaginable, and we did it against the odds. We may look easygoing, mild mannered, but make no mistake, we have spine and toughness. And that leads me to my second message to all our leaders, federal and provincial, as well as those who are aspiring to lead our country. Start showing that spine and toughness. That's what Canadians want to see, what they need to see. It's called leadership. You need to lead. Canadians are ready to follow. I know the spirit is there. Ever since Mr. Trump's attack, every political party is speaking out in favor of Canada. In fact, it is to my great satisfaction that even the Bloc Québécois is defending Canada. But you don't win a hockey game by only playing defense. We all know that even when we satisfy one demand, Mr. Trump will come back with another bigger demand. That's not diplomacy, it's blackmail. We need another approach, one that breaks this cycle. Mr. Trump has accomplished one thing. He has unified Canadians more than we have ever been before. All leaders across our country have united in resolve to defend Canadian interests. When I came into office as Prime Minister, Canada faced a national unity crisis. The threat of Quebec's separation was very real. We took action to deal with this existential threat in a manner that made Canadians, including Quebecers, stronger, more united, and even prouder of Canadian values. Now there is another existential threat, and we once again need to reduce our vulnerability. That is the challenge for this generation of political leaders. And you won't accomplish it by using the same old approaches, just like we did 30 years ago. We need a plan B for 2025. Yes, telling the Americans we are their best friends and closest trading partners, good. So is lobbying hard in Washington and the state capitals, pointing out that tariffs will hurt the American economy too. So are retaliatory tariffs. When you are attacked, you have to defend yourself. But we also have to play offense. Let's tell Mr. Trump that we too have border issues with the United States. Canada has tough gun control legislation, but illegal guns are pouring in from the U.S. We need to tell him that we expect the United States to act to reduce the number of guns crossing into Canada. We also want to protect the Arctic, but the United States refuses to recognize the Northwest Passage, insisting that it is an international waterway, even though it flows through the Canadian Arctic as Canadian waters. We need the United States to recognize the Northwest Passage as being Canadian waters. We also need to reduce Canada's vulnerability in the first place. We need to be stronger. There are more trade barriers between provinces than between Canada and the United States. Let's launch a national project to get rid of those barriers, and let's strengthen the ties that bind this vast nation together through a project such as Real National Energy. We also have to understand that Mr. Trump isn't just threatening us, he's also targeting a growing list of other countries, as well as the European Union itself. And he is just getting started. Canada should quickly convey a meeting of the leaders of Denmark, Panama, Mexico, as well as with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to formulate a plan for fighting back these threats. Every time that Mr. Trump opens his mouth, he creates new allies for all of us. So let's get organized. To fight back against a big, powerful bully, you need strength in numbers. The whole point is not to wait in dread for Donald Trump's next blow. It's to build a country and an international community that can withstand those blows. Canadians know me. They know I'm an optimist, that I'm practical, and that I always speak my mind. I made my share of mistakes over a long career, but I never for a moment doubted the decency of my fellow Canadians or of my political opponents. The current and future generations of political leaders should remember they are not each other's enemies, they are opponents. Nobody ever loved the cut and thrust of politics more than me, but I always understand that each of us was trying to make a positive contribution to make our community or country a better place. That spirit is more important now than ever as we address this new challenge. Our leaders should keep that in mind. I am 91 today and blessed with good health. I'm ready at the ramparts to help defend the independence of our country as I have done all my life. Vive le Canada. And I think both letters take a different approach to this. The first letter basically points out why it's a bad idea for Trump to even think about trying to merge Canada into the United States. And the second letter is a call to arms to all Canadians. And that has already started. The premiers of all our provinces and our prime minister have met and are working on a plan to battle, first of all, the tariffs that are going to harm not just Canada, they're going to harm the average American citizen as well. And I know that Americans really don't understand how tariffs work. I mean, you struggle with the exchange rate between our two monies. A lot of that is ignorance, meaning lack of knowledge, that Americans have about your biggest neighbor to the north. So I hope you gathered something from this. I especially hope if you're a Canadian, this is a call to arms. We need to defend that which is ours, which is unique in the world. We never in another time have we ever needed to be more proud of our heritage as Canadians. It doesn't matter where we come from in the world. We are Canadians. We are here. It doesn't matter if we have conflict with our Indigenous people. We are all Canadians, and we need to stand up against the tyranny that Trump is not just proposing, is inflicting upon our country. So I hope both Canadians and Americans get something from these letters. If you've stayed with me this long, because they were long letters, thank you very much. But it was something I felt I needed to do because I am a proud Canadian. Thank you for listening.